Hi, Crafty Meraki friends, Bonnie here. Today's cards feature a couple of beautiful cover dies, Wholeheartedly Mini Slimline and Craft Around. It's no secret that these dies create quick and beautiful backgrounds. I have a couple of techniques that can be used to add some pretty variations to these die cut backdrops. So we'll get started with an ink blending hack. I'm working on plum cardstock that will be die cut with the Craft Around cover die. This die will cut the panel to 4 by 5 1/4 inches. So I'm starting off with a panel that is A2 size, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. Using a blending brush, Distress Oxide Shaded Lilac is applied to the top half of the panel. After the ink is applied, I switch to a blending brush that is clean. I go over the complete inked area, extending where the ink meets the cardstock to get a nice smooth transition. The second panel, a rich red, is slightly larger than the die Wholeheartedly Mini Slimline. For this panel, I'm applying Kitsch Flamingo. The same brush that was used to finish off the first panel is being used with this one. I just simply took some paper towel and gave it a good rub until that lilac ink was not visible on the towel. And there you have it, a couple of ink blended gradient backgrounds in way less time. This is a great shortcut if you like this look but don't have the time to commit to creating it. Now to die cut the panels with the cover dies. Cover dies have a lot of metal area that are going through the die cutter, and sometimes there can be a lot of resistance. I find that by angling the die, it will feed through more smoothly. I also run it back and forth a couple of times. After I've die cut, there's lots of little die cut pieces and some are really stuck to that bottom plate. I just use the straight edge of some heavyweight cardstock to scrape it off. Any little bits left behind can create an impression on the next thing I die cut. Here's my first technique, and that is to add some embossing to the edges of the die cut background. For the plum panel, I want a very thin line of gold, and so when I apply the Versamark ink, the pad is at a pretty steep angle. Working one side at a time, they were coated with gold sparkle embossing powder, which really takes gold embossing to the next level, and then heat applied. For my next panel, I want the embossing to be a little bit bolder, and so I've changed up the angle of the ink pad when I apply the Versamark ink. The angle is quite a bit less than the other one, so I'm catching more surface area as I apply the ink to the edges. The embossing really adds some pretty detail to these backgrounds. These panels are going to be adhered to matte gold cardstock. The same gold sparkle embossing powder is going to be sprinkled onto the panel. I just pick it up between my thumb and my forefinger and then rub those two fingers together to get a fine sprinkling. So you don't want to be heating this embossing powder on top or else you'll just blow it right off. Heat is applied to the back just until that embossing powder sticks, and then it's finished off as normal. I like to build up the texture bit by bit, and so I apply the embossing powder about 3 or 4 times and then heat set it. There will be a little bit of warping from the heat, but when this card is put together with the liquid adhesive and some weight, the problem will be completely taken care of. I just love the fine and pretty texture that peeks through the die cuts. And now to adhere the die cut panel on top of the gold cardstock. A thin stream of adhesive is applied around the perimeter of the panel and also between the rows of hearts. And once my panels are lined up, then I put my MISTI on top and let the adhesive dry completely. These cards will be finished off with bold sentiments and silhouette foliage. I love the large block font that is used in the sentiments found in the Birthday and Love Slimline tag die sets. These dies were used to cut the same color of cardstock used in the background and also black sheet foam. The cardstock sentiment was adhered to the foam die cut. Popped my MISTI on top until the adhesive was dry. For the foliage, I'm working with Spade. This die set has 3 different sizes of leafy branches. For each card, there are 3 sets of these branches. For the first set, which has been cut out of cardstock, Versamark ink is applied to the edges of the leaves, and they are gold embossed. A second set was die cut from matte gold cardstock. The first set of die cuts are adhered to the gold foil, one slightly offset. So after the card was put together, I decided to make some changes, which you'll see in the end. So the 3 die cuts that I ended up with stacked together was completely unnecessary. However, it didn't hurt anything either. Those Spade branches are super sturdy. The craft round panel was adhered to an A2 size black card base, really showing off that pretty gold embossed edging. The Wholeheartedly Mini Slimline panel was adhered to a card base that measured 3 3/4 inches wide by 6 1/4 inches. Both the Birthday and Love Slimline tag dies came with secondary sentiments, which I die cut from matte gold cardstock and tacked to the bottom of the sentiment. Before adhering the foam back sentiment, one of the leafy stems was trimmed and tacked down. One end was adhered to the top of the die cut sentiment and the other underneath, and reverse tweezers held everything in place until the glue was set. The other 2 Spade die cuts will be attached to the left-hand side of the panel using small foam squares. The base of the stem will be adhered directly to the card front with liquid adhesive. It will sweep up with the foam squares tucked behind each of the leaves, giving it a more 3-dimensional look. The die cut background makes it easy to center the sentiment onto the panel. Foam squares were used behind a couple of those leaves on the leafy branch on the side to stabilize it. The stem of the 3rd Spade die cut was trimmed off. Using foam squares, it was adhered so that it would branch out from that main stem on the left-hand side. A little dot of glue at the base of the stem and at the top will help position it as it comes off of that main Spade stem. For the mini Slimline card, I first attached the foam back sentiment. The largest Spade stem was adhered the same way it was in the first card. The smaller leafy stem will branch out from the bottom of the larger one using liquid adhesive both at the base and the top as it sweeps out and covers a portion of the sentiment. Secondary sentiment was adhered to the bottom of the love, off-centered, slightly favoring the right-hand side of the die cut. This stem was trimmed down on the 3rd Spade die cut, and I was able to slip it in between the foam and the cardstock of the letter E using a little bit of liquid adhesive to hold everything in place. And when all was said and done, I wasn't completely certain whether there was enough contrast between the leafy stems and the background. And this is where the 3rd die cut comes into play. 2 additional sets of the leaves were die cut from both the red and the plum cardstock. The die cuts were adhered on top with liquid adhesive, but I made sure that they were slightly offset so that there would still be that pretty gold edging. I love the combination of a deep red with a plum. And of course, that's what inspired the red card and the purple card. But I loved the idea of consolidating the color palette on each of the cards. And that completes this pair of cards featuring Crafty Meraki's Craft Around A2 die and the Wholeheartedly Mini Slimline. Cover dies are a beautiful, quick, and easy way to create a background. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your visit.